This segment of the podcast is sponsored by Traveling Nice Experiences, here to help you create new memories one experience at a time. Contact Traveling Nice Experiences at www.travelingniceexperiences.com to book your summer 2021 travel. Once again, that's www.travelingniceexperiences.com. We're ready to help you create your next memorable experience.
Previously on the What a Word podcast. So there's a young person listening who may or may not be at a Philip Randolph campus high school, and they are thinking about flying planes, or maybe any other school in the city, and they have a desire to become a pilot as well. You've had some challenges, you've described many of them, but what would you say to some young person who has a dream of connecting the world like you do?
That if you have a dream, you just follow that dream. You don't dwell on any outside influences, whether it be financial, any environmental things, family, naysayers. Those might come. And actually, I would say some will come and say, no, you can't do that. You won't do that. You will never make it, blah, 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 blah. But if you know that's what you want to do, you can't let anything stop you. Okay? I told a classroom of students this. I rather wake up every day knowing that I get to put on a uniform and go to work and do what I love. I'd rather do that for less pay than to get paid $1 million, wake up every day and be miserable. So if you think about the end goal like that and then work your way back, you just pretty much designed your road for yourself. If you know that if I do this and I want to be this in life, and I know I'm going to be happy, then you just work towards that goal. Don't let anything stop you. There are going to be bumps in the road, but it's how you work through them is on the journey is how you get there.
You are listening to the What a Word podcast, an interview-style podcast where guests bring their unique experiences and insight on culture, life's challenges, and faith. Each episode is seasoned with words which will inspire and encourage. Now here is your host, Ryan Sharp.
Welcome to the What a Word podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Sharp. I am honored to have you join me for episode 61. What a journey it's been. It felt like just yesterday, but here we are. And I don't take it for granted that you hit play each week on these episodes. There are millions of podcasts available, and the fact that you join me each week in engaging and that you're inspired is a real blessing. If you know someone, and as evidence from the podcast recaps or the dub plates, as I like to call it, our guests come from a variety of fields, a variety of backgrounds, but they all exemplified a resilience, a transparency, faith, and those stories are life-changing. Because my guest, Brian Lee, was not born rich, was not tremendously resourced, but he had faith, he had support, he had determination. And there you have it. He's sharing with us how to dream and the importance of dreaming. And today will be no different because my guest is in the financial industry. My guest is Miss Kaysian Gordon, and she's a seasoned professional who has worked in the financial industry for over 20 years. She's also an author, and she is certified in a number of fields, has a lot of licensing, but she's also very transparent, and I believe you'll be blessed and encouraged by her story. Kaysian is a blogger, a 3 times published author, and she is family and community focused. She currently serves as her church's finance and stewardship committee chairperson. She enjoys being a mom, writing, reading, and traveling with her daughter. She's also a certified divorce financial analyst. Please join me in welcoming my guest, Kaysian Gordon, to the What a Word podcast. Welcome, Kaysian.
Ryan, it is such an absolute pleasure to be here. I cannot even tell you.
Honored to have you. Thank you so much for your willingness to share. And I wanted to start off by letting you know that I did pick up a copy of your magnificent devotional. It's a 60-day devotional entitled Walking in Obedience, Learning to Trust God Every Step of the Way. And I'm almost done with the book because it speaks so much to my experience. I want to know from you what led to a self-proclaimed non-author, non-speaking private person. What converted you into a published author, speaker, and someone now who willingly shares excitedly about things you once held private?
Listen, it has been such a journey, and looking back now over 5 years of writing, I can't make some of the stuff up if I even tried. Like, I can't make it up. So when I felt the call to start writing in 2016, I first heard it from a friend a few years before, and I'm like, you must be crazy, right? Like, no, do you know anything about me? No. And then somebody else came along and said the same thing, that I should write my experiences. And at the time, this friend had been relatively new in my life and would not have known that I write. And the ironic part is that I had just started writing again. So when I heard it, I stopped and I took pause, and I'm like, but God, and I went to God, and I'm like, you know that I have these issues with writing, right? And going through college and almost having a minor in English, you know what your issues are. Some comma splices, some this, and I took all the excuses, and God said, go read Exodus. Okay. And then when I thought I got all that I needed to get from Exodus, I went to church, and it's like the pastor was talking directly to me from the book of Exodus. And I'm like, all right, God. And so at a certain point, I ran out of excuses as to why I couldn't do this thing that I felt like I was being called to do. And it started first with sharing. And like, my first blog post is like, well, I'm ready. Not really. I'm not really ready to start writing, but here I am. And I think it was just that one step of obedience at a time, but that's not even where I started. My first book is Walking by Faith and Not by Sight, Learning to Be Still in the Midst of Life's Chaos. And when we were in the middle of the pandemic last year, and the title came to me, and we were literally in the midst of life's chaos and trying to be still throughout that whole process. And I'm like, wow, this book that was written in 2018, God saw a year and a half before in 2020 that we were going to need, or I was going to need to learn how to be still when everything else was going crazy around me.
Wow.
So the first part of it was walking by faith. And then the second part of it was walking in obedience, because after the faith comes the obedience part of it, of what I needed to do. So that's how the second title came around. And I believe there's a third that's coming up as God continues to lead me.
You mentioned in the book, and this has to do with obedience, that your obedience to this new assignment, you got confirmation that it helped other people with questions they had been asking of God. Did that just blow your mind when you learned that God was working with the intangible areas of people just because you were obedient?
Every single day. And even when you tell me that you picked up the book and you've read through most of it, Like, you don't understand how humbling that is, right? For me, I know you're preparing to have this conversation with me, but you did extra preparation, right? It wasn't just, all right, I'm going to read a few things off the internet, whatever else. The fact that you got the book and you read through it, not because it's an assignment now that you're preparing for, but because it's meant something to you and it speaks to your journey as well. Like, multiply that conversation over and over, and it's like, you mean that, and sometimes I launch into pathos, but you mean that this thing that I think is so private to me, that other people need to hear it as well. And that was one of the things that God said to me in Ecclesiastes, I believe it's 1:9, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that's been done is going to be done again. So the things that I'm experiencing is not new. And even though I'm like, but who wants to hear this? Who wants that one person? Kaysian, you're writing for that one person who I need you to encourage today, to know that a friend is going through the same thing and that you can minister to them in a way that having that tangible person that you can see and touch can talk to them through that same situation. And it's it's mind-blowing and it's life-changing.
Powerful. Because a friend said to me once, I had asked him about his preparation for speaking publicly about God, because he's a very dynamic preacher. And he said, Ryan, God gives us illustrations for every day. He said, just relying on God and writing down what his moments are throughout the day, he sees God in every day. So God, he says, he'll have moments when he's like, what do I prepare? What do I say to God's people? He said, Ryan, God gives us inspiration and illustrations for every day.
Listen, I'm at a loss for words, because that story that your friend shares about the experience, that's exactly it, right? I've written consistently, and I started the first year writing about 3 times a week, that I could find stories 3 times a week to share 350 words per story. And now I write once a week, and every single week it blows my mind that I have something to share, but it's really just the illustration of one thing that happened and God did, right? And it's just like, wow, like, how do you not run out of stories? And this is what happens when, listen, one of my favorite things now is Habakkuk 2:2, write down the vision and make it plain. When you start writing down things and you see how God has orchestrated and put it together, and in a way that, like, you can't even make the stories up at this point, right? But when you hear something and the lesson that you draw from it, the lesson that he's been teaching you through it, and then you apply one thing. So I tell a story of something that happened to me, and then I bring it back to one principle of what I believe God is teaching me, right? And I put that together and I end with a prayer just of what I want God to do for me. And I think if you notice a lot of my writings, I'm not writing to an audience. I'm writing for an audience of one, and that's me. And if you can relate to what I'm writing to myself, now sharing publicly, thank God for that. But when I write, I have to keep focused, because if I start writing to the masses, I'm going to lose what God is trying to do for me. It's the lessons that he's teaching me that I can share with others. It's not so much to write to this public thing. It's the lessons that God teaches me first so that I can articulate that to others.
You seem to have this ability to direct the reader back to God's promises, because I think it's easy for us to become distracted or lose sight of who God is, and that he actually made promises to us. And based on his character, he's true at his word. When he makes a promise, he fulfills it. But I think, and I'll use this personally as well, sometimes we tend to forget that God actually made promises to us. So we have nothing to base his answers on because we forgot that he actually made some promises to us. Why so subtle with the, the reminders?
I mean, I don't even think it's an intentional subtlety, right? I'm not forceful. It's just the thing that I'm learning, and a lot of my writing is reminding myself of what God is doing for me, right? It's reminding myself day to day to hold on to this thing that God has promised, even though I don't have an answer. So it's not like I'm trying to hide anything, I'm trying to do anything. And as I heard you talking about the way I bring it back to the promises, I have to laugh at the preparation that God did, and now my writing style, right, and how it's developed. Would you believe it's learning how to write a summary in college that now I can base my writing style on? So in college, I did a lot of English courses, not realizing I just enjoyed it. I have a minor in accounting and taxation. I don't know, accounting and information systems. It's my accounting degree. And economics is my minor, and business and liberal arts, So like I'm a business-minded person. I'm a mathematically inclined person. But there was this underlying thing for English, and I almost did a minor in it. Never quite. I'm like, I just didn't want to do the two extra classes. And so this is God's sense of humor at its finest, to know that he took me out of this place of math and business and everything else that I know to bring me on this writing journey that has nothing to do with my profession. And it's those years of writing summaries. It's those years of writing business meeting summaries of meetings that I sat in and had to come back and write a summary that now I can, and Ryan, I'm almost like a little bit shy to say this, and I know this is how I know that it's a gift from God. I can write one of my blog posts in 10 to 15 minutes. That's all it takes me to write each time I write to share something. I read through it for edits, and that's it. And I'm like, God, only you could do this, because I know that like I would never have considered myself a gifted writer, but now I know it's a gift from God.
Awesome. So it's a good segue, I believe, to your background as a financial advisor, financial planner, 20 years in the industry, wealth advisor at Claros Group, part of elite 13-person team at UBS, spending almost 17 years providing financial advice and investment strategy for the firm's ultra wealthy. And before you began that, you had a career in public accounting. Just wanted to find out from you, what do you believe led to your fascination and curiosity with numbers?
I'm going to say it's an answer to prayer. And it's not like I knew that I had a fascination with numbers. As I said, I was both good in English and math. So it wasn't like one leaning over the other. One of the things a high school teacher, Mr. Schwartz, said to me, from August Martin, said to me is, it does not matter where you start, it's where you end up. And this was as I was going through the process of selecting where to go to college. I had, I think I graduated top of my class, but I couldn't be valedictorian because I was only in the school for 2 years because I'd moved from Jamaica. And as I went there and trying to figure out, I had an accounting background from Jamaica that I took a couple of CXC topics, so whatever else. So I chose accounting. It was kind of easy to choose that. I don't know if accounting is easy, but that's what I chose. And that's where that started, accounting. And I don't know if I really like intentionally knew that that was what I was going to do. And then I started having this conversation pre-recording, but I was working, so I became a dentist, and I was working 2 different jobs on Saturdays after church. And once I got baptized, and I'm like, all right, I shouldn't be working. I don't think that's what God, I would literally go to church in the morning and rush to go to work in the afternoons. And I said, God, if you want me to do something different, you're gonna have to find me this job. And the job that came was a Monday through Friday internship at UBS. So I started as an intern at UBS, working with
just this team, an amazing team of one of the top advisors in the country 20 years ago, right? And I did that for 2.5 years, left because I had an accounting degree and I figured I should go into accounting, I should get my CPA license. Left, and then once I got my license, a little over 2 years in, I got invited back to UBS to work full-time on the team. So I went back from 2005 to 2019, not realizing the story and the journey and everything that God was bringing me through to get me to the point of where I am today.
And pretty accomplished as well, because the CPA, as you mentioned, and it led further licensing, insurance licenses. You became a certified, up to this point anyway, you are now a certified financial planner, Series 7 and 66 licenses, also volunteering time at the church. I want to know from you, what informed, because now, we're getting into what you do as well in terms of financial planning, etc., advice. What informed your financial decision making prior to adulthood?
Oh my gosh, when I look back, I have this I guess one of my first money memories is I had a little ring. I was probably like 5 or 6, going to like, I don't know, basic school. And I would, or maybe it was early primary school, I would let the other little kids borrow my ring for the day and pay me, or for a certain amount of time and pay me. So I would be going home with all this change, like all these coins. First, my mother's like, "Where'd you get that from?" And I'm like, and it wasn't until 2 or 3 years ago when I was about to start my entrepreneurial journey that this memory came back. One of the other things that my mom did at an early age is that she would send me to go do business transactions. And now I'm like looking at her like, you really allowed me to do that when I was that little? But it taught me responsibility. I would have to take the bus to go to the bank, go deposit the money, go buy fabric, as she would say, to do whatever she wanted to make something. She would send me to the store, give me instructions on how to do it. I would never do that now. And even now I was like, oh my gosh, I really did that to my kid. But it taught me this sense of responsibility of going to the bank, depositing the money, getting the bank book, and coming back home, right? And being able to do that over a number of years. But one of the things that really transformed my, I think, financial life was after college. And I told you before that I was an intern at UBS. So I got my accounting offer to start in December of whatever the year was. I was a December graduate. So I got my my offer to start, but I wouldn't be starting for a year in public accounting. I still needed to do something in that year. So I opted to stay at UBS. And in that time, I knew that I was going to be making X dollars. And it sounded like a lot of money to a 22-year-old, right? But in reality, when you take out taxes and you start saving, that lot of money turns out to be not a lot. But anyway, throughout that year, I was living, I don't know if I was putting extra stuff on credit cards, doing all kinds of things. And I started my public accounting job. And there was this one guy, Isidore Miller. And I have to thank, every now and then I have to just text him and say thank you. I started out with some debt, and it wasn't a lot. Like compared to now, it was like, I know, $2,000 or $3,000 of debt. But at the time, it was a lot for what I was making. And he said, and I had to pay rent and I had to do all these things. And he sat me down and said, okay, Kaysi, this is how we're going to do it. I don't even know how I got to share my financial life with him. And he said, you're going to pay down debt. You're going to save $50 out of each paycheck. You're going to automate taking it out. And you're going to save putting money in your 401k plan while you're still living, right? So he sat me down, I want to say at 23. I paid off this debt rather, like with guidance pretty quickly. I started saving my $50 into this ING account because that was a high yield savings account at the time, and also saving for my 401k plan. And I think how instrumental that basic guidance was at that age, right? So I hadn't gone too far into debt. I didn't have any student loans because I went to Queens College on full scholarship. And So here I was starting out with this fundamental of when you get it early at 23, it makes a difference that you're getting it at 30 or 45 or 50, right? So even though, and just the fact that I automated that $50 and it didn't feel like a whole lot at the time, but it was that habit creating, it was the investments, putting the money away um, in the 401k consistently. And now I'm able to go back to, depending on the client that I'm working with, going back to these fundamentals of automate your savings, don't have too much debt, whatever else. And UBS just exponentially took what I learned from the foundation and grew that to where I am today.
That is powerful. So the gentleman's name is Mr. Miller?
Yes, Isidore Miller.
So I thought about what you call the basic guidance. And I've termed it differently. I sometimes say people have a way of giving us casual financial information, which is life-changing. Now, for you, it was the set-asides that automated paying debt down, which you got in your early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had friends who, it was a coworker who says, I know the office may have given you general information about the 401k, but here's why you should do it. And they explain the pre-tax dollars that, is put away. And most of my friends who signed up for any retirement plans, it's because a coworker broke it down, gave them the basic guidance. So that is sobering because it leads to my next question. In your line of work, ultra wealthy client, they have other centers of influence. What have you found amongst our people in terms of our centers of influence when it comes to financial planning, financial advice, and money management?
Ooh, so one of the things that I enjoyed most is being able to incorporate my background of accounting and financial planning to understand the estate planning part of what I did for my clients, right? And I tended to work with the more complicated clients because of the different background that I had. It was just unique. Accounting, I understood the accounting consequences and the taxes. I don't do taxes, y'all. I don't do taxes. And I say that to everybody. I don't do taxes. I understand how it all fits together, but I'm not a tax preparer. And working, one of the, I think the key differences I see is that these ultra high net worth clients, they knew what they needed. They knew the limitations of what they knew. They might have been attorneys and different areas of being a lawyer, but they were not estate attorneys. They were not accountants. They were not financial advisors. And so they were willing to hire the people who could properly guide them. And I think often we don't realize the value that these professionals have and are bringing to the table with the financial guidance. I might have just dropped a little bit of a nugget that you said, like it's so powerful, of not having too much debt, automating your savings and doing these things. But this is my 20 years of experience, and this is what it has brought me. And I know there, like sometimes a meme or whatever it is, like you go to somebody and he solves what you need in 10 minutes, and you wonder why you have to pay them for so much. What you're actually paying for is the 20 years of experience. What you're paying for is my undergrad, my MBAs in accounting, finance, and taxation. You're paying for the time that I took to study for the CFP exam. You're paying for the experience that I bring to the table. So I can solve for you and look at your picture and give you ideas in a half an hour. It takes longer than that, but I can see things that you won't necessarily see because that's not the area that you're trained in, right? So when I want guidance on something that I don't have any expertise on, I don't know how to create a website. I don't know how to do marketing. So I'm going to be willing to go hire somebody and yes, pay them. And I have to determine, is that the price that I'm willing to pay, right? Is that the price that I'm willing to pay for what I'm going to get? So I think bringing back the original question is those clients understood the value that they were going to get, and it was going to save them a lot of headache and heartache and money over time when they did it right. You can't come to me, it's like, I know this, I know that, whatever else. Okay, fine, you do that. But I know that the guidance that I'm going to provide you is going to get you leaps and bounds. And by the way, you said Mr. Miller. Izzy was a year older than me. He just had different guidance than I did, right? So he was only 1 year older than me. But his guidance was different. And that made all the difference in the world, to him being able to sit down and guide me and say, this is what, and I believe we had check-ins too, right? So he didn't just say, all right, do this, whatever else. I would actually go to him and it's like, well, I'm contemplating this. And I remember once I had to decide, I just come back from vacation and I was deciding whether I could afford to do something. And I went to him and he sat me down and we sat together and talked it through, right? And I was able to make a decision. And sometimes that's what having a professional does. You have to make a decision as to whether you can afford to buy this house. What price can you afford to pay for the house? You have a proper financial advisor. And by the way, not everybody who calls themselves a financial advisor is a financial advisor, right? I can't emphasize that enough. If the person's only selling you an insurance policy and then leaving you alone, that person's an insurance salesperson. They're not a financial advisor. So understand the difference of that. So it's being able to have the right guidance for what you need. And not everyone's going to need the same things, right? So making sure that you match up your need to the person that you're hiring.
Good points, good points. And so I imagine if we could contrast the two, the ultra wealthy client has individuals who understands his needs. Your approach is holistic. You're working along with those individuals to accomplish the client's goals. What happens for you often when you are meeting? I imagine you do a lot of these presentations in faith communities and in communities where people don't have the resources necessarily. What are you finding in terms of access to information? What challenges are individuals facing who are not as well resourced in terms of financial goals, management, etc.? And if it's too loaded, let me know. I could break it down a little bit.
No, I mean, I think it's a great question. Probably loaded, but it's a great question, right? Sometimes we're going to the wrong people for guidance, right? And so that makes all the difference in the world. I think there's also a gut check. If it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't feel right, check that there might be something off. If somebody's going to come to you and say, I can double your money in a week or two or whatever else, does it feel right? Does that sound like the way things are done, right? And if anyone's guaranteeing you that they can double your money in a week or two, that's usually a red flag to spot. That's not how typical investments work. So there's no get rich scheme, right? There are plenty of books that we can buy. And if you don't like reading books, there are plenty of things that you can do to listen audio, right? So it's going to the right resources. WhatsApp and the WhatsApp messages, that's not necessarily good resources, right? If the person is too fast talking for you to understand and grasp what they're saying, that's not the person for you either. You want somebody who's going to take the time to listen. And when I do presentations, I understand that not everyone will be able to afford what I'm giving, right? But I'm giving it out because I feel like I've been called to do this and to share the knowledge that I've gained so that you know what to look out for when somebody comes to you, try to fast talk you, take your money, the little money that you have saved or whatever money that you've saved, and now you don't understand why it's locked up in an annuity for 100 years and you can't touch it, or you can only touch it and take out. No, understand why you're doing a particular investment If you're being talked too quickly and all you're doing is being sold something and you don't understand and you're not being educated, don't do it. Think about it. I know we're listening to a lot of your listeners might be faith-based. Pray about it, right? I know that God will give you direction and wisdom. And one of the things I do every day, Ryan, is now I pray for wisdom and understanding, because I too need to understand. I too need to have wisdom for the things that I'm doing for clients, for the people I'm meeting. I need to have discernment of character for when I meet people. So pray for that. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask and God will grant it. So don't think your finances are separate from everything else that you're asking God for, right? It's a part and parcel of what you're doing in your life, because if you have financial worries, it's hard to focus on the other things that are important. So when your finances become an important part of what it is that you're doing and how you're accomplishing and how you're doing it, it makes the rest of your life go a little bit easier. Are you enjoying the What a Word podcast and want to learn how to share it with others on social media? It's easy. Go on your favorite podcast app, find the What a Word podcast, and hit share. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you won't miss any episodes. And if this podcast has encouraged or inspired you, then please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps new listeners find us easier. Thank you.
Our country's history, and the reality of that history, the impact of that has meant that some people financially, like you mentioned, Miller, are ahead of the game just by virtue of their influence when they're born. They're surrounded by, it's as natural as breathing for them, in terms of their access and the information they have. How sobering is it that you come across individuals who they work hard, they're diligent, they have the same hopes and dreams for their families, but it just does not make sense, the take home pay.
It is very sobering, right? Because there are a lot of people who are trying. And one of the things that I think is also important to point out is that we've been told for many generations, and I'm sure your generation is one of them too, Ryan, is that education is important. So what we did, or what many did, is they went out and got this education that has now cost them thousands, tens of thousands, probably $100,000 in loan, right? And now you have to pay back that. And if you come out of the education and the field that you're in and you're making 40,000, you can't buy a house. You can't do so many of the basic things without being almost harangued by this cost of the thing that you were told was going to get you to a better place. And so one of the things that I try to guide my clients with kids is like, yes, education is important. And I will tell you that Queens College is one of the best things that happened to me, right? I went there on a full scholarship. The tuition was probably $4,000 at the time. So I came out of school without debt. It was also the place where I was able to get the internship that got me at UBS, right? So all of those factors, I did not go to a school that I graduated with debt, thankfully, thank God, right? But there are so many who, because we've been told that education is the key to getting out of this, we're taking on this debt. But if you're starting out your career with $100,000 in debt and you're making $40,000, and now you have this payment that's literally going to last you almost your rest of your life, By the way, you're paying so much in interest. You're paying most of it in interest to start, right? So you're not even touching the principal. And how do you live when you need to do all of this? You need to get rid of the student loan in order to get back to zero, in order to be able to start saving, in order to be able to do all these things. So yeah, it's very, very sobering. So I kind of try to guide my clients that don't try, unless you know for a fact what the kid's going to do. Like, look at a school that's reasonable. You can still get a really good education from schools that are close to home. I went to a commuter school and I don't regret 1 minute of it, but that was my choice, right? Everybody will have their own choices and preferences. It's being able to make wise decisions based on the resources that you have.
Powerful. I had a guest on recently, and she mentioned to me that the conversation her peers were having in the elite school she attended, and her parents, humble means, but they got her into these private institutions. I think with the research and due diligence, the cost savings didn't hurt them too much. But she learned that her colleagues, the fellow students, the conversations they were having with their parents were something like this: how much do you believe you need to earn to live comfortably? What is your temperament in terms of working a 9 to 5? Here's what you'll need to do to get to the goal you've discussed. This is the type of profession you may need to go into. They're having these conversations even before middle school. So by the time they're and the parents are well resourced, mind you, but they're already thinking about the cost, what taxes are, how much the taxes could be. They're having those conversations. And I know that goes to access, that goes to having the information as well, which is why I drove, to that point, that we have well-intending individuals, but it's the lack of information, it's the lack of access.
It's the lack of access, but also we have access to a lot still, right? It's just a matter of finding that. And sometimes it's Googling the resources and reading through or listening to the books, right? Because there was a book published recently on what you can do, and it was in the New York Times, because the author is a New York Times editor, and it's Ron Lieber's education on a book on planning for college and what you can do. And you start having these conversations with the kids when they're in 8th grade, because their grades are going to make a difference for how much scholarship they can get. You might not know that yourself, but now there are resources that you can access, right? And there are times that, and yes, I'm in a profession, so yes, I'm exposed to different things, but sometimes it's a simple Google search of what is out there, what kind of scholarships are out there for my kid, what kind of, it's access and lack of access, but we also have to recognize that there are things that we can do. And our parents cannot teach us what they do not know, right? I can only be as limited for my daughter as the information that I know. So my daughter she's tech savvy. She can go find stuff. Good. Have her go do some research as well, because this is also a part that she can play in learning things that her mother did not know.
Your bio, Kaysian, reads like a person that had their foot on the gas pedal for a long time. And I'll just I'll say this. I look and you're in Queens College doing a major in accounting and information systems and a minor in economics, business, and liberal arts. Fine. Good start. Then an MBA, Fordham University, dual concentration, taxation, finance. You have your CPA license. Then you're doing all of these insurance licenses. You're a certified financial planner, Series 7 and 66. When did you pause? When did you You had, when did you take a break? Because all of these certifications, all of these licenses, what was life like for you when you were in the midst of all of this? Did I identify it right?
Brian, I'm over here laughing. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to start by saying this. I think I heard this phrase when I was around 20. It says, if you do nothing with the time, it passes. If you do something with the time, it passes. Choose how you're going to let the time pass. Wow. Right? And so now you're reading my bio from the things that I've accomplished over the course of 20 years. And it sounds like a lot, but at the time that I was doing it, I was just going to school. So first I went to Queens College, right? And the natural thing to do, I guess I didn't have a social life, I don't know. I've now discovered that I'm a high learner, so I just naturally enjoy learning. So I went to Queens College, and then when that was over, like right on the cusp of that being finished, I started taking the CPA exam, and I was working full time. So I don't feel, now I look back and I can laugh and say, wow, thank God, like all the accomplishments. But within those accomplishments were failures as well. And I think for me, that's why it's so important. Like, I took the CPA exam. I took 3 parts the first time, and the rules were very different. I was pen and paper. That's how long ago I took it. It was pen and paper based. I took 3 parts and I failed 1. I took 2 parts and I failed 1, and I took the last part and passed it. I took the CFP exam. Even before that,
That's a certified financial planner exam.
Yeah, yes. Certified financial planner. I took my series exams. I took the series 7, passed it. I took the series 66 and failed it the first time by like 1 or 2 points. Listen, fail me properly. Don't fail me by 1 point, right? But I failed it, and what I had to do, I had to take it over. I took the CFP exam. I failed the first time, and I had to go. I did not want to go back to the drawing board. Like I think I was married at the time, like starting to think about like starting a family, and now like, you mean I have to take this exam again? I did not want to, but actually got encouragement from my niece, and she's like, I look up to you, like do it again. And I'm like, I don't like you right now, but I signed up for the exam again, and thankfully I passed it because now it is allowing me to do so much of what I'm doing. But intertwined in all the success that you hear is the failures, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that you're going to have successes and people will see the successes, but they're not going to see the failures behind it and the tears behind it, right? But to answer your question, when do I find time to pause? And I think this is what this season is about, this new season for me. It's leaving corporate to do this entrepreneurial life that I never in a million years imagined that I would be doing. And it's allowed me to slow down in a way that I haven't before. And it actually caused me anxiety at the onset because I was so used to going at the breakneck speed that I was going. I was entering this life that I had no idea, could not see around the corner what that would mean for my life. And it's only 2 years in this summer, even with the pandemic, I was trying to still go at breakneck speed, and God is like, no. That book that you wrote in 2018 is the title of your season in 2020. Learning, walking by faith and not by sight, learning to be still in the midst of life's chaos. Kaysi, I need you still. I need you. The things that I'm doing in your life, I need you to slow down so that you can understand them. And now in 2021 that we're in, I finally allowed myself to give myself that grace of, you mean I don't need to be at my desk at 9 o'clock? I can do certain things to get me, but I can still have a full work day and feel accomplished at the end of the day. And it actually has taken a lot to get to this place because society has taught us we need to be going, right? And I think there's a season for that, but we can't spend our whole lives going, because we're gonna miss the blessings of what we find being in the pauses of life.
And on this entrepreneurship journey, what is your target group? Who needs Kaysian Gordon services? What are the groups or individuals that you are making your services available to?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. So I say I work with women of faith who are going through a financial transition. So you could be on the starting your career, because I recognize that I'm doing what I'm doing now because I got that guidance at 23, right? And then compounded in my 20s and 30s, to be able to do what I'm doing now. It's that person who is now looking at their finances and realizing I need to do differently with my finances if I want to accomplish the goals that I have set before me. So it's almost like a mind transition of looking at their finances in a different way. It's that person who's planning for retirement, and they have a few years out and they have a number of years out. It's that person who is on the cusp of retirement and saying, can I retire, right? It's also that woman who's been recently widowed and the husband might have handled the finances before and they knew enough, or maybe they didn't know anything at all. Now, it's also, I guess I didn't put that in the bio, but I got licensed, a certified divorce financial analyst at the end of 2019 because I just needed to do something else. Don't ask me, right? Don't ask me. It's to help that woman who's going through a divorce, having been there myself, right? I understood the finances because I took care of the finance of the household, but I also understand that many women do not typically handle the finances in their homes, even if they're paying the bills. So my goal is to come alongside you and hold your hand through that process and incorporate faith in the conversation and the encouragement. One of my natural gifting I'm realizing is exhortation, to encourage, to cheerlead, to guide you, but also to give you the wisdom that God has given me to help you to look at your finances from a different perspective. I do work with men, but there's something special in working with the women and the women who understand, and the chit chat conversation that it's not about, like, it comes back to finances, but we're talking about more than finances. We're talking about life planning. We're talking about the things that you want to do that doesn't necessarily, it's not finance related, but it's impacted by your finances to be able to accomplish these things. So I love the conversations that I'm able to have with that group of women and men, because I do work with men as well.
Awesome, awesome. There's a quote in your devotional that I think would be a good segue as we prepare to land the plane, as we petition and beg God to do the impossible, especially with our finances. Sometimes we have to do things that seem illogical to us. Do you want to amplify that for our listeners, that why you wrote that?
So I'm actually going to bring it back, and if I hope you don't mind. I'm going back to what God laid on my heart yesterday. So you shared that I'm the stewardship director. So yesterday I had the pleasure of doing the stewardship emphasis at my church, and I'm going to bring it back to the Bible with that. So the widow of Zaraphat, and this is what I shared for our offertory. So this is the story found in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 7 through 24. And I'm going to summarize the story for you. There's a famine in the land. God sends the prophet Elijah to Zarephath, to a widow with a son. And I want you to read this as the person who is least able to provide for his needs. He goes and requests bread from this poor lady. She explains that she only has enough oil and flour for one more meal. She plans to eat it and basically die from starvation after. Elijah tells her to make his first and gives her a promise from God. You and I talked about promises from God before, right? Verse 14 states, the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land. Elijah doesn't reference the term she used. When she talks about it, she said she only had a little in the bottom. When Elijah references it, he makes it sound as if there's a full jar of flour and a full jug of oil. Friends, there was a condition. This poor widow had to trust God's word and feed the prophet first. Can I tell you that's a really tall order when you're looking at the little that you barely have?
Wow.
But she decides to trust him, and the jar and jug never runs dry. And then an even bigger miracle occurs as the story unfolds. This woman's son dies, and Elijah cries out to God, does some things, and the child's life returns. Imagine all the miracles she's witnessed simply by trusting her little flour and oil to the master multiplier. Friends, our Father is asking us for the same trust today so that we can witness his miracles in our lives. And notice that I didn't bring that to money or anything else as I share this story, right? There is so much that we have to trust God with, and that includes our finances. And sometimes, like, if I were to look at when I was beginning my journey of what I could afford to do, and looking back at where I am 2 years and 2 months later into my journey, what I did not share yesterday is that this story is mine. I've looked at God multiply the resources that I had. And I'm like, but God, this math does not make sense. Like, I can confidently stand in front of a congregation and say, God's math does not make sense. Brian, I can't share. Like, I can't make the stories up, but the math does not make sense. But what God is asking us for is our trust, right? And that's the foundation of everything else. I remember clearly where I was. And I said, God, why are you bringing me through these situations? Why am I here? Why am I still here? And the answer came back clear as day, because I want you to trust me. And it wasn't this developed trust overnight. It was the one story at a time, the 1 week at a time as I wrote each blog post. You guys get to experience one story that I share on a weekly basis. But what you don't see is now the 7 other stories when I journal to God every single morning, right? And I'm just like, I'm blown away that I still have a story to share, but God keeps multiplying the stories, and he keeps giving me new insights, and he keeps doing all these things. And I'm just like, say what? And it all comes down to, Kaysi, I want you to trust me, and I have to bring you through experiences in order for you to trust me.
Powerful. I'm going to lean on you to do this for me, to Kaysian, as a stewardship director. What I have seen firsthand in terms of miracles, it's the stories of individuals on fixed income who were faithful to God in stewardship, financially and otherwise, and the long-lasting impact. You've probably had a number of stories you've experienced, seeing people's faithfulness. Would you mind sharing a few and taking your time on that, about people's faithfulness and the impact?
So I'm actually going to send your listeners back to another podcast, my very, very good friend Crystal Ward's podcast that you did some months ago. And she talked about the story of her father and the amounts he earned, and what he was able to do with putting his board up in the living room so that his children could understand the financial. And I don't think he might not have done that with the understanding of the implications he was making for generations to come. He just did that. And part of what he did was he talked about returning a tithe and offering to the church, right? So sometimes, and I've got some stories, Ryan, as you can imagine. I'm going to go back to now my other story of, and this is what I share, and I just have to laugh because it's humbling, right? And this for me was an eye-opener, and I wish I could tell you that I learned my lesson after that, because I didn't. I'm honest. So I told you throughout that I wasn't always Seventh-day Adventist. And I was going to church in the morning and I was going to my job in the afternoon. What I didn't tell you was the two different jobs I had. One was working in a real estate office, and the second one was working as a cashier at the pharmacy. Pharmacy right around the corner, I could walk. It was just nice and convenient. Not making a whole lot of money. I'm in probably college, and my pay that week was $100 for the week. And that morning I was in church and I heard them talking about tithing and offering, and I'm like, God don't expect me to return my $10 on $100. No. Like, I can't afford to do that. I'm in college. I'm barely making anything. I still have to help with certain things at home because my mother just didn't have it. We had just moved here from Jamaica. So I needed to help out with stuff. And I'm like, nope, God can't expect me to do this. Anyways, I get to church and I remember the dress I was wearing. I was wearing a long dress, a long brown dress, and it didn't have any pockets. And I was there, and this lady came up to the counter, and I rang up her stuff, and she put the money down on the counter. She said, I don't have enough. I'm going to go out to the car and get the rest. All right. I didn't even look at the lady's money because she said she didn't have the money. The store was quiet, so there was nobody there to mess with the money. So she comes back in and she brings the difference, and I count it, and I'm like, oh, it's, you still need $10. This lady accused me of stealing her $10. Can I tell you, like, I bawled like a baby in that store, like just bawled, because I'm like, I've been so honest. I had watched other people in the store do all kinds of things to who work there, and I'm like, I had never done any of that, and now this lady, this outsider, like, what are my bosses going to think of me? And sure enough, I went to the back where, and they're like, no, we believe you. We know this lady, and it's not you, whatever else. But when I thought about it, I hadn't stolen from the lady, but I had stolen from God, right? And it was that $10 that was like, all right, God, all right. And listen, as I said, I told you I wish I had learned that story. But I'm also going to tell you the other side of that story. In 2000 and I guess it was early 2018. I was now writing, nearing publishing my book, whatever else. And I felt like God said to me, I don't need to test you in the area of finances anymore. Okay, cool. And then some months later to tell me it's time to leave my job. Say what? Right? So now I've had to learn how to trust God with all the different areas. And trust me, it is not easy. It is not always easy. It's like you're looking at all the bills. You're looking at all the things that you need to do. You're looking at the things you're just like, so I could divert this money and pay for this, and I would be sure this is taken care of. And then you have to take a deep breath and like, Lord, I trust you. Lord, I trust you. Lord, I trust you. And even now, right, I still have to go through that exercise and say, Lord, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to trust that you're going to take care of all the other things. So I hope that answers your question.
Powerful stories, man. And you're absolutely right, man. It's a series of tests, just like you experience professionally. You get through one, and he's testing our obedience, not as a mean-spirited, acrimonious person, but one who loves us and desires to be in a relationship with us, man. So it's powerful. Kaysian, tell listeners how they could access you, get your devotionals, get in contact with you should they need financial planning advice. How can they best contact you?
Sure. So thank you again for asking that. So my email address is kgordon, kgordon@clarusfinancial.com. So Clarus is CLARUS financial.com. That's for work-related stuff. And for my website, it's kaysigordon.com, because I was coming up with a name, and I'm like, God, I'm not creative, right? So it's really just KAYSIGORDON.com for my website. And this blows me away. I have well over 300 posts there, and It's that showing up consistently, even when you don't think you have anything, showing up consistently and allowing God to do his work. For Facebook, I believe it's Kaysian Gordon. So Kaysian, last name Gordon, Gordon. And Instagram, it's Kaysi Gordon, Kaysigordon. And the different modes of being able to reach out to me.
Awesome. And almost finally, there's someone who listened and they heard God's promises being repeated, that he's an answering prayer God. He desires a relationship with us. But there may be someone who is listening who is not aware that God can provide for their needs, even those of which they are not aware. Could you give that person listening some encouragement as we close?
So absolutely. And I love, there's something that you say that I don't realize how powerful, or I don't think you realize how powerful it is. It's that relationship building part of it, right? When we come into relationship with anyone, we desire to have conversations with them. And conversations is not talking one-sided, right? Relationship is going both ways. So it's taking time to sit and listen and to be in God's presence, to be able to hear the instructions. And if we're so busy, always on the go, we never have time to stop. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is to sit down and carve out some time. And you don't have to make it a whole lot of time. Carve out 5 or 10 minutes. And the time that works best for me is in the morning. So before my daughter wakes up, I get up and I force myself to get out of bed. Now it's a habit. So now it's something that I look forward to, is sitting quietly in God's presence, where I can read his word, where I can absorb devotions, where I'm not rushed to do the next thing before the world starts waking up. So having that relationship, and if it's finding one scripture in there and holding on to it for dear life. So the one that I recite now, I heard at a Christian Financial Advisors Conference this year, and they challenged us to pray for a week. And Ryan, would you believe I've been praying it for like easily 6 months at this point, every single day? And it says, Lord, teach me how to number my days, that I may gain a heart of wisdom. And for me, I've added an understanding. So I say, Lord, teach me to number my days so that I may gain a heart of wisdom and understanding. I'm looking for God to do these things in my life. I'm looking for God to teach me that I don't need to run and chase anyone to work with me. Teach me how to trust you, that if it's supposed to be a good fit, that it's going to be a good fit. Teach me how to recognize when something is not a good fit. And it's hard to say, to go back to a client who could potentially pay you and say, you know what, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to work. Because when you're hiring somebody, it should be a two-way street, right? And it's trusting God to say, all right, God, I've asked you for this. Now I'm going to hold on to this promise, and I'm going to trust that you're giving me this discernment from now, that I don't get myself into hot water at some future date and save myself a whole lot of grief and aggravation at a future point. So help me to trust you. Help me to trust your timing as well, because that is so important. When we get something and it's not the right time, no matter how good it is for us or how good it is, it's not going to be good for us if it's the wrong time. So we have to trust God's timing as well. And as persistent as my daughter is, be the persistent widow. Keep asking God for what you're seeking. Keep trusting that he can do above and beyond anything that you can ask or imagine. Because when God says it's time to go, Ryan, as you and I talked about before we started recording, listen, nobody can close those doors. Nobody can open them before it's time, and nobody can close it when God says it's time to open. And he moves things at a pace that blows our mind when the time is right.
Awesome, awesome. Kaysian Gordon is a recipient of the 40 Under 40 for the New York State Society of CPAs. Family and community are important to her. She currently serves as the chairperson for her church's finance and stewardship committee, as well as an active church leader. Kaysi is a blogger and 3 times published author. She's a sought-after public speaker on both financial and faith topics. She enjoys being a mom, writing, reading, and traveling with her daughter. Kaysian, thank you so much for joining me on the What a Word podcast today.
Ryan, I knew it was going to be fun, and it did not disappoint. Thank you so much.
Honored. Thank you so much. Blessings to you, and all your dreams, may the desires of your heart come true.
Thank you, and the same for you, Ryan. All the same for you as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Listen, I'm at a loss for words, because that story that your friend shares about the experience, that's exactly it, right? I've written consistently, and I started the first year writing about 3 times a week, that I could find stories 3 times a week to share 350 words per story. And now I write once a week, and every single week it blows my mind that I have something to share, but it's really just the illustration of one thing that happened and God did, right? And it's just like, wow, like, how do you not run out of stories? And this is what happens when, listen, one of my favorite things now is Habakkuk 2:2, write down the vision and make it plain. When you start writing down things and you see how God has orchestrated and put it together, and in a way that, like, you can't even make the stories up at this point, right? But when you hear something and the lesson that you draw from it, the lesson that he's been teaching you through it, and then you apply one thing. So I tell a story of something that happened to me, and then I bring it back to one principle of what I believe God is teaching me, right? And I put that together, and I end with a prayer just of what I want God to do for me. And I think if you notice a lot of my writings, I'm not writing to an audience. I'm writing for an audience of one, and that's me. And if you can relate to what I'm writing to myself, now sharing publicly, thank God for that. But when I write, I have to keep focused, because if I start writing to the masses, I'm going to lose what God is trying to do for me. It's the lessons that he's teaching me that I can share with others. It's not so much to write to this public thing. It's the lessons that God teaches me first, so that I can articulate that to others.